F-35 Lightning II is currently the world's most dominant multi-role stealth fighter. After 27 years of development, its design remains an ambitious one. The three variants of the F-35 are a highly versatile set of combat aircraft whose goal is to replace the Harrier, A-10, F-16, F-A-18 and F-117, and will likely remain in service until the year 2070. Hi there and welcome to our channel. We invite you to sit back and relax as you join us on yet another exciting model building adventure. Off the bat, I loved the box art which depicts the B version of the F-35 Lightning II Joint Strike Fighter as it executes a vertical takeoff from the deck of an aircraft carrier. The canopy and clear parts were packed separately and securely in a bubble wrap envelope, and they were transparent and scratch-free. This kit had a lot of parts to it, and the molding was of a good quality with very little flash or seam lines. Interestingly, the surface details featured both recessed and raised rivets and panel lines, which added a lot of interest to the exterior of the model. Besides the three main parts of the fuselage, there were 8 sprue frames in all, including an extra set of parts for the F-35's ordnance, which was included in later releases of this kit. The kit even included a pilot. Another added bonus was 2 sets of photo etch parts, which would allow for some super detailing of the model. The decals were colorful and highly detailed. Unfortunately, this kit had been in Stash Mountain for a while now, and the decals had not aged too well. They were a little on the fragile side, and I had to be careful not to tear them later on. The instructions were excellent. Each step of the build was clearly illustrated, and the various sub-assemblies were explained in great detail. Best of all was the paint guide. Although all of the color callouts were for the Mr. Hobby range, it was fairly easy to find equivalents in the Tamiya range, which I use. There were detailed, full-color illustrations for 5 different variations in paint schemes, all of which included a detailed guide for the placement of the decals. I received the impression that the ideal way to build this 48 scale miniature was in the VTOL configuration depicted on the box art, as this was the best way to show off the unique features of the aircraft. First of all, I assembled the pilot figure. The process was fairly straightforward, and the figure had a small amount of seam lines which were easily taken care of with an X-Acto blade. I found some great reference pictures for the pilot and tried to paint it to match these photographs. I put together the pilot seat and separated the other cockpit elements from their sprue tree. These were all painted black, and I added some extra details to the interior. Unfortunately, the pilot didn't quite fit into his seat. At first I thought about chopping his feet off, but I felt bad about doing that. I opted for an alternative solution and sliced off the foot pedals and cut holes into the base of the cockpit. Then they fit in quite snugly. I applied the instrument panel decal. Once that had dried, I glued in all the parts to complete the cockpit. Some of the parts needed a coat of gloss white paint. I decided to do this while they were still attached to their sprues. The F-35 is fitted with the highly advanced Pratt & Whitney afterburning turbofan engine. It utilizes a system that connects a drive shaft to the turbines, which turn a lift fan that operates much like a helicopter's main rotor. The lighter lift fans provide the F-35 with vertical lift and short takeoff and landing capabilities, and replace the dedicated engines of previous VTOL aircraft, as the lifting engines become dead weight once the aircraft is in flight. To prepare the engine components for their metallic paint, I gave them a coat of Alclad gloss black. All of the parts were airbrushed with a light coat of chrome paint. Once dry, I applied a dark wash to the parts to emphasize the surface details. The Stovall swivel nozzle of the real aircraft has a lot of electronics and wiring. Unfortunately, the nozzle provided by the kit had none of these details. I did a small bit of scratch building and tried to replicate the complex wiring as much as possible. One has the option of building the two weapons bays open, but I decided to close them up. Having made my decision early on, I was determined to build the aircraft in the act of performing a vertical takeoff. Another reason was that the upper and lower fuselage of the model didn't fit together too well once the weapons bays were installed. A tricky part of the build was to secure the engine parts within the aircraft before gluing the two halves of the fuselage together. However, before any of this could happen, the cockpit needed to be glued in place. I did not want to risk damage to the clear canopy parts, so I didn't glue them in at this stage, and I protected the cockpit innards with a piece of cardboard instead. There is a bit of excess plastic on the housing of the lift fan, which had to be sanded down for the drive shaft to fit properly. I think this is intentional, as it allows one to get quite an accurate fit, especially because there is no room for error when one installs the air intakes. Like I said, this part is a little tricky. The way that the parts for the air intakes meshed together with the rest of the model was phenomenal. The air intake sub-assemblies were seated so perfectly that gluing them seemed almost unnecessary. Gluing the upper and lower halves of the fuselage was quite a daunting experience. Not only is it important to check that the two halves of the fuselage match up correctly, one also needs to check that all of the engine and lift fan components slot into their intended positions before one commits to applying any glue. I used masking tape to keep everything in place as the glue cured. Attaching the wings to the aircraft was a fairly straightforward process, and I used some clamps to keep everything in position. I noticed that the starboard wing would dip downward slightly, so I added extra support with some masking tape to correct its orientation. I used some of the photo etch parts for added detail. I glued in the tail fins, and once I was satisfied that they were seated properly, I removed the cardboard which was protecting the cockpit. The F-35 is actually a family of aircraft that is produced in three main variants. The VTOL, or conventional takeoff and landing F-35A, the Stovall, or short takeoff and vertical landing F-35B, and the catapult assisted takeoff but arrested recovery F-35C. It has a length of 15.7 meters. Its maximum speed is Mach 1.6 at altitude and almost 1.3 thousand kilometers per hour at sea level. It has a range of 1.2 thousand kilometers on internal fuel and a service ceiling of 15,240 meters. After cleaning and polishing the clear parts, I applied some thin down canopy glue around the edge of the cockpit. I positioned the canopy glass deliberately and allowed the glue to cure overnight. I carefully masked off the canopy and the upper and lower openings of the lift fan. The drive shaft doors and front landing bay doors were fixed in place with some poster tack, and I inserted some plastic foam into the rear landing bays to mask them off. After repeating this process at the back of the aircraft, I applied a grey surface primer to the whole model. This was polished carefully using a micro mesh cloth to smooth out small imperfections and remove any dust residue left behind by the primer. Using some Tamiya German grey, I added some pre-shading to the various details of the aircraft. This was followed by the darker grey coat, which was airbrushed lightly over the entire surface of the model. I applied several light layers to prevent the panel lines from being obscured completely. I remembered to repeat this process for the wheel bay doors and lift fan cover, which was still kept separate from the main model. Once this had dried, I applied a layer of semi-gloss varnish over everything to prepare for the next phase. Masking off the serrated skin panels was, once again, a labor of love. It was a process which spanned many hours, as each mask was carefully measured out and cut to shape and painstakingly positioned across the aircraft. The light grey coat was also applied sparingly in several layers. The serrated skin panels form part of the stealth characteristics of the F-35, as they help to reduce the aircraft's radar cross-section and render it almost invisible to an enemy radar. Once the paint had dried, I removed the masks carefully and used a toothpick to lift the more stubborn bits of tape. The result was a surprisingly neat finish, and it required only a minimal amount of retouching and cleanup. After a light coat of gloss varnish, I removed the masks from the lift fan and opened up the wheelbase and rear part of the aircraft. Then it was finally time to install the landing gear. All of the white areas received a dark wash to dirty them up a bit and enhance their details. I applied the decals cautiously. Some decals went on without a problem, but a few of them were very brittle and ripped at the slightest touch. Luckily it wasn't all bad, and I managed to apply most of the decals without too many disasters. I applied a black panel line accent to the recessed panel lines and rivets, and a wash to the raised details. This brought out a lot of the finer details on the surface of the aircraft. At this stage, the wheels started breaking off, so I drilled out the plastic axles and replaced them with brass rods, which I fixed into place using CA glue. After a final coat of flat varnish, it was time to add the smaller clear parts. I started with the EOTS, which is the electro-optical targeting system situated underneath the aircraft, and followed up with the lights on the port and starboard wingtips. I removed the canopy masks slowly and carefully, and used a blunt toothpick to lift the more stubborn bits of masking tape. There are always a few small areas where some gunk from the masking tape stays behind on the canopy. I used some mineral thinners on a cotton bud to clean these up. Once all the sticky residue was removed, I used a fine cotton cloth to buff up the canopy and restore it to its previous shine. The 1:48 scale model of the F-35B Lightning II by Kitty Hawk has been criticized by many model builders for being inaccurate and difficult to build. In my opinion, it's an excellent kit. All of the parts fitted together perfectly, except maybe for the pilot, which was an easy fix, and the detailed instructions and colorful paint guides made the build process an enjoyable one. The F-35 Lightning II Joint Strike Fighter is a versatile aircraft which is tasked to perform a variety of missions, including strike, air superiority, surveillance, reconnaissance, and electronic warfare. While the F-35 does not have the maneuverability of other fifth-generation fighters, it has advanced stealth and jamming technology and a threat detection system that increases its survivability in the hands of a skilled pilot. So long, and thank you for watching.